Good afternoon, everyone. I am Amy Dickerson.
And I'm Kendra Yoch.
And welcome to the 9th webinar in our Franczek Educational Equity series. Kendra and I continue to be your moderators for this monthly series that is running throughout the year. During this series, we are exploring how school districts can identify and break down systemic barriers that are depriving students of equitable educational opportunities. We're exploring how to more intentionally allocate resources based on need and how to use the law as a driver for internal reforms to support our most vulnerable student populations. These conversations may not always be comfortable, but they are critical to helping make meaningful and positive changes in our public school system. Today, we will be discussing priorities for the new school year, and we are very excited to welcome Dr. Valerie McCall, Director of Educational Equity at West Aurora School District 129, and Nate Rouse, Director of Equity, Race, and Cultural Diversity Initiatives at Barrington School District 220. We are going to be talking about the process of setting priorities, engaging stakeholders, and building equity into the fabric of the district. We will also discuss the role of equity audits, developing the capacity and participation of students, staff, and community, and overcoming barriers that impede progress toward established goals. So welcome to everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. To everyone listening, we are so happy that you are here today. Please submit your questions through the Q&A function on Zoom. It is much easier for us to keep track of and answer questions there than in the chat. And of course, if you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to contact any of us. So with that, we will go ahead and get started. So first, to get some background, let's begin our discussion by having Valerie and Nate tell us briefly about the districts that you currently serve. So Valerie, would you like to start?
Absolutely. So good morning, afternoon, everyone. So I'm in West Aurora School District 129. We are a K-12 unit district, pre-K-12, in southeastern Kane County. We have 18 buildings. So we have 1 early learning academy, 10 elementary schools, 4 middle schools, 1 high school, a special education school, an alternative education school, and a career development center. And we serve over 12,000 students with 1,800 staff members. With regards to our actual demographic background, we have 39 different languages, and we have 59% of our students are Latinx, 23% are white, 11% are Black, 2% 2 or more races, 3% Asian American, less than 1% is Pacific Islander, and less than 2% American Indian.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for attending. I'm in Community School District, Barrington School District 220. Our enrollment is just under 8,600 students. Demographics are as follows. We have 61% that are white students, 18% that are Hispanic, 15% are Asian, 2% are African American. As relates to other sorts of things, 90% of our students are low income, 16% of our students have IEPs, and 9% are ELL learners. As relates to the building district-wise, we have 12 schools, 1 high school, which is Barrington High School, 2 middle schools, 8 elementary schools, and 1 early learning center, which is pre-K and kindergarten. Thank you.
Great, thank you guys. Give us a little bit of information about your individual backgrounds and your professional path to this role. How did you find your way into this work and into these districts? Nate, do you want to go first on this one?
Sure. I am entering my 27th year in education. A lot of that was highlighted in the middle with 11-year experience as a high school principal in a 1 high school district. That's where I kind of cut my cloth as relates to leadership. Done everything from being a dean's assistant to a substitute teacher, as well as an English teacher, then a dean and assistant principal. So I prided myself in having the lived experiences of those actual positions, which is, I think, helped me develop empathy and understanding as it relates to leadership and just connecting and meeting with people. So that being said, I'm currently in a 10-month position as a district leader, knowing just enough to be dangerous about, the politics of the schools. I've done my share of long nights and 80-hour weeks, and am glad to be kind of on the sidelines, but yet still in the district office in spaces where I can make a systemic change.
Valerie, how about you?
Sure. So prior to coming to West Aurora, I served 9 years as a director of curriculum and instruction. Before that, I also was a director of reading in a unit K-12 district. I've served as a principal at Northwestern in their Center for Talent and Development. I've supervised student teachers, served as an adjunct professor in a master's and doctorate program at a local university, and also spent some time in the classroom, kindergarten K through 8, and also as a reading specialist. But perhaps one of the more meaningful experiences that I think really helped me was one, just being a mom of 3 boys who are African American and having to serve as an advocate to them, and at the same time serving as a parent on our district's equity task force, the community in which we live. So all of that, I think, has helped to prepare me for my role currently.
That's great. It's really great to bring so many different perspectives, and each of you have served in different roles. And then, you know, even as the parent kind of sitting on the other side of the table is definitely a different experience. And I think that it's good to have all of those feeding into what you're doing now. So tell us a little more about the scope of your role and how does it fit in to the larger administrative team in the district? Valerie, do you want to start on that one?
Absolutely. So in my job, one of the things that I really enjoy about it is that I get to work with everyone, some of everyone, because equity touches everything. So I get to work with our Student and Family Services Department, Communications, Teaching and Learning, Human Resources, Transportation, all of our teachers, our paras, office professionals, and maintenance workers. I also get to work with representative community members, representative student teams. So each of these groups that I work with has representatives and leaders that I also serve on our district leadership team and our senior leadership team. So that's a large portion of my role in terms of how it fits into the administrative team. But as our equity audit starts to wrap up here, that's also going to be shaping my role in terms of how I fit in with each of those groups that I named.
Nate, how about you? What does that structure look like?
Very similar to what Valerie has mentioned. Although my my office is planted in the district office, I'm in the schools, working with parents, with teachers, with staff, with students, doing a lot of community outreach. It's been really great to, as Valerie has talked about, being in a role where you kind of touch everything, because equity, if you're doing it right, is systemic, and you want to make it systemic. So you are involved in multiple conversations. And so it's been really nice to leverage those relationships and use them as we look at really trying to develop a systemic path for our work. And so it just so happens that this year we're transitioning a new superintendent and a couple new board members. And so what's been nice is being on the ground, at the ground level, as we are ending one cycle of a district vision, right, a strategic plan, and we're in the process of building another one. And what's so nice is that, I will be able to kind of co-pilot that vision as it relates to sustaining and embedding equity in everything that we do. And so it's great to be in a spot where, from the ground up, we're able to really begin to think strategically again, what we want our next 3 to 5 years to look like, and then a long-term vision, but making sure, again, that embedded equity is embedded in all of that. I do have, as Valerie had mentioned too, one of the big components of last year was taking time to meet the key stakeholders to develop a district equity team. So I do have a district equity team that consists of all stakeholders in our district. In addition to that, I'm creating a kind of ad hoc advisory group of parents, because what I've learned over the time is that everyone can't be on this particular committee that we have, and so I want to make sure that I'm able to reach out and connect with those that still want to be engaged, and make sure that I have that support from parents, through the multiple opportunities that we have within our district K through 12, to leverage those relationships to really support our work as we move forward.
That's great. Thanks so much. And hopefully we'll get to hear more, from each of you too, about those district equity leadership teams and how you arrived at those, and how those work into your day-to-day work and in the work that you're doing to create your visions and plans for the year. And I guess with that in mind, maybe let's move to really talking about what are the priorities that you're setting for this school year and that you have for this school year. And if you could talk a little bit about what those look like, what those are, if those are even developed in a formal plan, or if those are working and a little fluid in nature. So Nate, do you want to start?
Sure. One of the first things that I'd like to say is that this is the second year that this position has been in our district. And so it was also nice to come in and see a job description, but then again, based on past experiences, based on how schools operate, I was able to also chime in and make some suggestions to really kind of carve out a position that I really thought would give me the best optimal experiences to meet the needs of the district. And so I say that to say, last year, again, really about establishing positive and meaningful relationships via Zoom, because obviously we were in a pandemic. And so the second year for me is really going to be focused on community outreach. And what I mean by that is getting in spaces where we can really have dialogue and talk about the work that we're doing in our school and why that's important to our community. And so whether that's, our various community groups that we have in our community that are outside of the school, such as your libraries, your town or village community centers, your Rotaries, many of those other outlying positions that are really important to school districts and how we kind of stay connected. And as we move as a school community, it's been great to establish those relationships. But now what I want to do is really provide them some of the support that they might not have, as so that we are kind of all connected. One of the things I think is really important is that, as a school, it's one thing as a school to try to move forward in some equity work or anything that's new. You want to make sure that you're also providing those opportunities for your parents and your community members, so that again, there's this cohesiveness and this transition that seems to be a lot more systemic. I've learned over the years that when you just attempt to do those things in isolation as a school district, your community is unaware of what's happening. And then when it is a sensitive topic, especially as race and equity and inclusion have been a national conversation as of late for all kinds of reasons, right? It's really important to be transparent, but at the same time, give your community some opportunities to be a part of that. And so that's what I'm really focused on doing. Is I partnered with a couple groups in particular. Our library is one that I mentioned. We have a group called Be the Change, Barrington. That's actually a former group of alumni that really has spearheaded some of the push for the district to start thinking about some things differently based upon students finally being in a position to share their lived experiences, right? And so I've been using those to leverage the opportunities. The other great thing is, as I talked about a little bit earlier, is having a new superintendent coming in and really understanding the role and really kind of giving me the opportunity and the voice to make recommendations at that cabinet level to move us forward. And so how that looks is simply doing professional development for our leaders, right? So there's been a lot of work that's been done in our schools in silos. And so to make that systemic, I wanted to do two things. First of all, create a district equity team that everyone can buy into, but then also make sure that from a leadership perspective, our leaders are getting the sustained development, professional development that they need. So that this year is focused on an administrative academy that we're having here. We're fortunate to be a provider, but at the same time, that academy is directly focused on leadership for equity. Okay. And after that, I'm developing a sustained model over the year to make sure all of our leaders, and there's 60 administrators in our district, but we're all going through these experiences together so that we can make sure that as our staff continue to grow, we're growing with them and are allowing them the opportunities to move and make those transitions and changes and put our leaders in a situation where they're able to support our teachers and the efforts when the phone calls come and when people start asking those questions about the work. So that's just kind of like a barrage of some of the things that are happening right now that I feel that are really paramount to the success of the work.
That's great. Thank you for describing it, both in terms of your high level goals as well as those detailed plans. Valerie, what about you in terms of your priorities?
Sure. So I have goals that I had to share with our school board in the spring in terms of what the direction for our educational equity department. So working towards these goals along with our equity audit is what drives my work from day to day. So this year, our district equity leadership team, our plan is to finish up our book study that we're reading. So we're reading case studies in social justice and diversity and social justice, as well as So You Want to Talk About Race. So I've used those two books with our district equity leadership team to help build capacity. And then we're going to be moving into developing some talking points that they can use as they start to expand our equity discussions in their respective buildings across the district. We're also going to start to take a look at our policies and hold them up to that equity lens to see if they reflect what should be an equity literate environment. I'm also working collaborative with our HR team to develop a plan to increase the number of teachers of color on our staff. Similar to Nate, I also have a Community Equity Advisory Council. So last year we started that. We kicked off about January, February, and we're going to continue to work towards recommendations to address some of the inequities that they see as community members within our district. And also they want to read, they also said, well, can we do a book study too? And I'm like, sure. So they're going to be reading So You Want to Talk About Race as well. Similar to Nate, also we have a student team. So our Student Equity Advisory Council, our middle school team just met yesterday. Our high school team will be meeting next week. And I'll be working with both of those teams to start to develop their equity focus for the school year. So the thing with our students is that our students, they really like to have like something tangible to put their hands on. So last year, our high school team was fortunate to be able to present to the Kane County Juvenile Justice Board. And then they went on to the state level as well to share some of those inequities and tips for law enforcement to consider as they're working with clients of color. On the professional development side, so I'll continue to offer sessions. So I did some this summer that were available to teachers and all of our staff, as well as did a session at our administrators retreat to prepare them for discussions that may be coming up with community members along the lines of critical race theory. I'll be offering some during the school year. And then also similar to Nate, at the end of the school year, I'll be doing an Equity Admin Academy for our administrators here in the district. So there'll be a professional development piece. Then I'll also continue working with our individual school improvement teams in terms of so that they're able to start to implement some of the equity, literate mindsets and frameworks across their building. With regard to our equity audit, all of our quantitative and all of our qualitative data has been collected. So we should be getting our summary report in November, December-ish. So once our superintendent has had the opportunity to review that, then I'll be working to share that out with our different stakeholder groups. And then finally, the thing that comes as a result from that equity audit is the equity action plan, which I think, Nate, it sounds like you guys already have yours. So we're just going to be starting to develop that in January. So that covers everything for this school year.
Great. Awesome. I saw in the chat some questions. You guys both mentioned doing administrator academies. Are those things that other people can sign up for? And if so, can you give any more information about them?
Yes.
Go ahead, Nate.
Okay, I'm so sorry. Your regional office of educations actually have already kind of administrative academies that are established. And the other thing that I found out is that you can actually, depending upon the academy that you choose, there's also room for you to actually learn to become a presenter. So one of the things that I was thinking about this year, for example, is since we were going to go ahead and do one on equity, leadership for equity, that was great, but I also wanted to be a presenter at the same time. So I'm going through the process of doing both and so I think that's a way to do it. But if you're asking specifically for those, I would certainly check into the Regional Office of Education's. And again, it doesn't just have to be yours. You can look at the other ones in the state. And then what you do is you connect with one of the presenters there and develop a relationship and set up a time and make it happen. That's been one of the strategies I used this year to get that moving.
Anything else to add, Valerie, on that?
No, I was just going to say that ours has not been officially posted yet. I do know that it's going to be for our administrators first, and I don't think we have finalized just yet if we're going to be opening it up to other administrators in the area. But once I get more information, I can share that with you if you want to. I get that out. But yes, as Nate said, check with your regional offices to get that information.
Great, thank you. We certainly heard a lot of overlap from each of you in terms of talking about the priorities that you have, but also, heard a lot that it seems to really be also driven by where your district is at and where you're at in that process. Could you talk a bit more about how you arrived, perhaps in, with others at your district, in setting and identifying the priorities that you're going to have for this year in particular, and what that process looked like, or any lessons learned or tips for those listening who are in the process of doing that? Valerie, do you want to start?
Sure. So similar to Nate, my position is new, so I'll be celebrating my 1-year anniversary in September. But upon arrival, I talked with our superintendent, listened, and really thought about the best way to work towards our mission vision statement, which is fostering an environment of equity and opportunity, but at the same time, how to embrace curiosity, complexity, and the joy of learning from our teaching and learning side, all while holding everything up to do what we do in our district through an equity lens. So in addition to that, I also listened to various stakeholders as I met people across the district and really examined that through an equity lens. Because one of the things that you have to do in this position is you really have to listen more, talk less. But what's most challenging is trying to remember to take small steps. And I think by nature of just being an educator, we like to do everything. We want to do everything well. So it's important to listen, take baby steps, and then that will help in terms of prioritizing the work along the journey. Because while with equity, everything needs to be done, but everything can't be done. And probably one of the other things that I will say that has really helped me along this during the time that I've been in this position is to also talk to other people. I do a lot of listening, a lot of talking, but talking to people like Nate and other colleagues who are part of our National Equity Directors Consortium as well. So that has been helpful as well.
So thank you for that. Nate, do you want to share?
What's interesting and a dynamic that shifted for me is, I spent a lot of time being a principal, right? And so as a principal, you have goals and you have these leaders, these things that you want to do. And it was fascinating when I attempted to embed, equity in everything I did as a school leader, right? So then, I'm in a district position where that's what my job description is. And so the good news is that, I'm in a position where I'm not necessarily fighting folks to kind of embed equity into things per se, because again, this is the role. This was established in our district. We have a commitment to equity, and these are things that we've committed to. So using those commitments as the foundation, it allows me to do the work, I think, a little bit more seamlessly throughout the district. That being said, some of the interesting, the challenges that come up for me, or I think about is being in a role where you want to be the face of your equity work, but then at the same time, not being the equity police, right? And so what I mean by that is every time that something happens in the schools, all of a sudden people want to pick up the phone and call you and then ask you to kind of problem solve. What I've tried to do is be a resource, but I want to make sure that things continue to stay in the schools and our school leaders are positioned and supported to make sure that they're able to navigate those waters not on their own, but in their schools, to keep that out of a situation where I'm just the face of the work and people just think that this role is just to do all of that. So I say that also to say I'm a director with no team. And what I mean by that is I'm a director that doesn't have an assistant, assistant director, doesn't have folks in the school that do that work. And I know that as we think about moving forward with this and making it really systemic in a district with 12 schools, there's going to have to be more individuals that at least spend some of their time focus on this work in those positions, in those buildings, to do it better. So I say that to say, I talked a little bit earlier about having a district equity team. that is at the district level. One of our goals is to also mirror that model in every one of our schools for the next school year. So our principals are getting trained, and then at the same time, we're going to start bringing in a coalition of the willing to start, right? To get each school to have their own equity team that I lead and support with the principal and the individuals that are already connected to our district equity team as representatives, right? From those schools to really, really make this a little bit more systemic, right? And so, when I think about coming in and how that kind of worked, it was me kind of coming in, having the conversations with the school leadership team based upon what the job descriptions were, doing a lot of listening, as Valerie talked about, doing a lot of, just going on listening tours, going and meeting school individuals who would want to talk, meeting with parents, and doing lots of listening. And then, as Valerie mentioned, I can't stress the importance of, because these roles are new, talking to colleagues in similar areas. We didn't feel at the time that we had a network last year that was really supporting the work in the way that we needed to, so we created our own. And so that has grown to a group of about 16 of us that have really been getting together and looking at strategizing together to not just support our work, but then again, share ideas, right? And making sure that, again, if something is working somewhere else, it doesn't mean that it's going to work exactly that way in your organization, but it certainly gives you a head start, and you can look at that and then curtail it to the needs of your organization, but as long as your fidelity to the tenets are there. And so those are some of the things that I think about when I think about the work and establishing the priorities. And then the other good thing is just flat out, it's in the title. It's fascinating, and I'm thankful to finally be in a role where I don't have to kind of force or stop doing something else that's in my title to do this work. And so now that I have this role, I want to also make sure that I'm diligent in helping others understand why this needs to be embedded in their leadership and how they go about their business as well.
Thanks, that's really helpful. We do have a question here about, I think you each mentioned doing an equity audit in your district, and sort of, did you use an outside group? What did that process look like? How has that fit in with the work that you're doing?
So we did use, or we are using, an outside group. That process had started just a little bit before I got here. So when I arrived, it was just a matter of kind of wrapping up the contract and the agreement, and then starting that process. But I do know that some of our other colleagues are also in the process of looking or searching for equity auditors. There's quite a few out there, and you really just kind of have to vet them the same way that you would vet anything else that you're looking at and considering doing in terms of, the cost and what is the end product, what does the process look like. But I will say that the process is all similar. So they came in, and there's the qualitative and there's the quantitative side. So the quantitative, there's a page of about, I think they're about like 15 or 20 different items that they needed to collect from our student information services folks. Everything ranging from attendance to discipline to how many members of color are on your PTO, and just all types of things of that nature. And that data she collected goes back for 3 years. So her team will be analyzing all of that in our summary report. And then on the qualitative side, there are the focus group interviews. So the focus group interviews with our community members, with our staff, and with our students. And there were focus group sessions that ran for a series of nights where she asked them a set of questions. Now, the interesting thing about the questions were actually developed by our district equity leadership team. So they had control over what questions were being asked to each of those groups. And then she recorded all of those, of course, and then she'll be writing that summary up. And so those two pieces together will be what comes in our summary report. And then she will also provide us with a list of recommendations that we can consider or not to move forward with our work, with our equity action plan, which we'll be developing. So that's how it kind of worked in our district. I don't know, Nate, if it works similarly in yours.
Well, not exactly. And so what I will say is that, sometimes you have to help people understand the why before you can begin the process of doing what it is that you need to do. So Valerie has talked, and again, we've had this conversation before about the equity audits in the process. And some of us in our districts aren't necessarily ready for that audit for a variety of reasons. And so to get us into a space where we can understand the importance of an equity audit, what I've been doing is kind of doing some of that on my own. And one of the things I can think about is reporting. Sometimes in spaces where the diversity is not normal, you often hear people ask about why we're doing this work. I can't tell you the countless times that after even I was hired, I still have people asking me, why do we need an equity director in Barrington, right? And so that lets me know that the data, either we're looking at the data and we're not looking at the data the way that we should, or we're just oblivious to the experiences that are happening. And so I'm just going to say respectfully, we might be a little combination of both. And so what I'm doing is, as I'm rolling out some of the professional development this work this year, I'm also recommending what I'm going to call a racial incident report. And what I mean by that is, if you think about the Title IX toolkits that many districts have, and how we have gotten really, really good at districts at really codifying and having a clear understanding of how we will investigate Title IX incidents. Well, I want to do the same thing as it's strictly related to racial incidents, because I unfortunately still have people that think that these things aren't happening. And sometimes when it happens, it comes from a couple reasons. Sometimes when things happen because they are in schools, if it doesn't get big enough to get the attention where we feel that we need to report out, we just kind of deal with that in-house, right? And so what I mean by that is it gets buried. And so that becomes something or a statistic or an incident that happens that people don't have an idea about. Well, I want to take that away because I want to make sure that we are diligent in making sure that we recognize that these things are happening. And then most importantly, we provide the support that's needed immediately when these things take place. And so I'm in the process of providing all of my schools with reporting mechanisms so that we can then collect this data and then come back at the end of the year and say, oh, wow, look at these experiences that our students are having. Clearly, we need to do something more systemic to address these issues and find out what we can do differently. And that's where I'm going to have the strong recommendation for an equity audit at the end of this year. Part of our administrative academy that we will do this year, as we look at data too, will also be asking the questions about why we aren't ready for, or we haven't done an equity audit in the way that we'd like to, or the way that I'd like to see it done. So different ways to get to the goal. But I wasn't in a position where when I got here, this was something that they were already working on. So I'm helping them get there along the way.
Excellent. Dr. McCall, if you're comfortable sharing who did the audit for you, some people are asking for that, or if you have other, if you're comfortable sharing that.
Sure. So the group that we're working with is Systemic Educational Equity. With Dr. Yvette Dubiel, but I know that there are many others. We've been very pleased with her and her work, but I know that one of our colleagues in our National Equity Directors Consortium put together a list of, there are countless others. So I would encourage you to, look and see which shoe fits best for you, because just because I'm using her, that may not be what's working best for your district or whatever the case might be. So I would encourage you to investigate to see who's out there.
Great. Okay, so let's think a little bit about the pandemic, the disruption of the past year and a half. In what ways does that impact or interact with the work that you're doing and the priorities that you have for this year as kids are coming back into buildings? And inform the work this year. Valerie, do you want to start on that?
So I think the biggest impact that I saw with the pandemic has been, obviously on the social emotional side. So a lot of that work has been done through our Student and Family Services Department. But in terms of specifically with the work that I'm doing, equity related, a lot of the meetings that I have with our Student Equity Advisory Council, as well as our community, those meetings had to be done over Zoom, as well as with our district team. So while I'm really grateful that we're able to have those, it does change the interaction. It changes the dynamic a little bit when you're on Zoom opposed to in person. So as we're moving back into the building and having some meetings in person, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to have those meetings and continue to have them in person, because I think when you're doing equity, there's a lot to be said for sometimes that silence, that space that needs to be present in the room that you don't always feel when you're over Zoom. So for us, it's really just been the social emotional impact and just the meeting in person that's so helpful and beneficial when you're doing equity work.
Great. Nate?
Ditto what Valerie said. Coming in, again, I started last year, so coming in and creating a district equity team of 38 people and all stakeholders and doing it via Zoom is certainly different than having them all together in the same space. The other thing that we're transitioning to this year is, besides the in-person meetings, as I mentioned before, we have 12 different buildings in our district. And, in bigger schools, or bigger districts, a lot of time, what you don't realize is sometimes the cultures are different in every building, right? And the experiences are different in every building, and the demographics are different in every building, right? And so one of the things that I wanted to do with the committee is rotate the meetings into the different buildings so that we can see the different cultures and experiences and have the leadership kind of give us a little 30-minute, intro of the school and their culture and demographics, do a little tour so that we can actually see, some of the diversity that's actually in our district in a different light. The other thing, obviously, unless you've been living under the rock, besides the issues with, the anti-mask kind of faith you've been going to at public board meetings, there's also been this notion of this critical race theory ban that's also happened. And so I've been blessed with the opportunity to have those individuals come to our board meetings and carry pictures of me and my name and make assumptions and misinformation about our work and what we're doing. And so normally what I do is I do a report in the fall and do the report in the spring for our Board of Education, just as a routine ordeal. We've decided to speed that up a little bit so that I could do two things. One, really talk about the really cool work that we're doing, but also just kind of address some of these kind of concerns with some facts and some counter narratives that speak to what critical race theory is, frankly, what it isn't, and then spend most of the time really talking about what we're doing in the district. But that's going to take some time. And I do envision, I was talking to my superintendent earlier this morning, is just thinking about some listening tours, some small town hall meetings, just to really get out there and be transparent. Because again, in my area, unfortunately, again, as we begin doing the work, that's when the resistance starts coming. And the resistance has friends, and the resistance also has tangible things now that they can lump to whatever issues that they have. I hope everyone knows that this issue is bigger than critical race theory, right? It's not that's not really what the debate is. The debate is about what we're really trying to do to transcend our schools to be more equitable. And unfortunately, everyone just doesn't see that way, and it's become incredibly politicized. So that has been a really big kind of shift. It hasn't stopped our work, but there are certainly people that were really gung-ho in leadership to really move forward, that have stopped back and said, well, wait a minute, how do we deal with this? And so now I'm prepping to just, again, arm them with the tools, providing those counter narratives, and then again, speaking truth to power as relates to our district and what we're really doing in equity.
Yeah, you raised a really important point. I mean, the idea of critical race theory, it's all over the news, and it's really animated a lot of people and created a lot of concern. And so really trying to differentiate what is that and what are we actually doing, and creating that educational space. Valerie, are you dealing with that as well in your district?
So we haven't had it come up as much as Nate has had in his district. I do know that it did come up at one of our board meetings. We've had more discussion in our board meetings around vaccines and masking, things of that nature. However, one of the things that I did do at our administrator retreat prior to the school year starting was to, as part of my, how to be an equity literate administrator training that I did with our principals and district administrators, was to equip them with, I call it like a slide deck, what is critical race theory, what it is, what it isn't, why is it, popping up in education. And so I shared those slides and shared that presentation with all of our administrators, hopefully so that they will feel a little more confident when these conversations come up, because just because they're not having them now doesn't mean that it won't happen. It just means that the people that want to talk about it, they just haven't got around to it yet. Because I did get some of those phone calls back in the spring, with people wanting to know, I hope you're not teaching this to my kids, and what does the district think about this? So it's out there. It will bubble up again soon. So similar to what Nate said, in terms of just really equipping our leaders and our administrators in our district with the confidence and the power to have some of these uncomfortable conversations. Yes, I'm here, and we're here to support them, but sometimes we can't be everywhere at once. So my goal is really just to be a support, to come alongside everybody as we become more comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Thanks. And you guys have both talked about, in your role, sort of educating and supporting other administrators, and really looking to, committees of parents and community members, of students, and bringing in a lot of people to this work, right? Because one person can't be responsible for everything. Do you guys want to comment a little bit more about how you've really built that capacity and buy-in in different stakeholder groups?
Well, I think one thing that comes to my mind, probably one of the things I'm most proud of, most excited about, is with our district equity leadership team. Last school year, we met on a regular basis. And one of the things that I gave them after each of our meetings was something I called the DELT, so District Equity Leadership Team Challenge. So the challenge was to take the information that they gained from our particular session, take it out and share it. I don't care how you share it, but whether it's at the lunch table, whether it's at your team grade level meeting, whether it's at your BLT, whatever you do, I want you to share it. And then to take the DELT challenge, they had to post a picture, write something, say something about what they did to take the DELT challenge. And then I, acknowledged them at our meeting. And it was really amazing to see how different members on the team took the DELT challenge. And so that's one way that I'm working to build capacity among the district. Everybody isn't going to just take the DELT challenge, but if they see someone else over here put up, like one person did this amazing bulletin board with our important words, our important equity words that we were learning as a result of our book study and the capacity building that we're doing. One of the other things that I've done is I was afforded the opportunity to be able to provide training, not only just for our teachers and our administrators, but also for our transportation, for our office professionals, for our custodians, for everybody. Because one of the things that I think happens is that with a lot of new, and equity is not an initiative, but a lot of the initiatives that happen that are rolled out in education are only for teachers and administrators. And sometimes we forget about our important people, our cafeteria workers, our transportation department. And so I have to say that our transportation custodians, all of our other staff members that are not teachers, they really appreciated an opportunity to attend one of these equity PD sessions at the start of the school year, because it helped them to see that this isn't going away. This isn't disappearing, when the initiative is up in 2 years. This is something that should be woven into the framework of who we are and what we do within our district. And so because they felt included, now they're comfortable starting to build that capacity within the transportation department, within the custodians, within the office professionals.
That's awesome. Nate, how about you?
Yeah, I think that's a great strategy. I hadn't spoken about this earlier, but I do and have provided over the summer. We call them summer universities here, where teachers have been able to take take workshops for credit. And what I've asked is that I wanted to make sure that I was able to open that up to our support staff as well, and kind of level the playing field and let everyone just come as they are and who they are, kind of similar to what Valerie had talked about, so that everyone could feel a part of the experiences. I feel it's really important that in schools we do a great job of providing professional development for our teaching staff, but what about the folks who answer the phone? What about those folks in the guidance office and in the offices who are the first really line of contact with parents, or the first line of contact with a student who's upset or frustrated? You know, what tools have they been given to be able to de-escalate that conversation and not escalate it and make it worse? And so all the more reason for providing as much as that support as possible. The other thing that I've really done is, and this just comes from my prior leadership, is really try to establish positive and meaningful relationships with our parent-teacher organizations. And the reason why I say that is because that is a huge group to have when you're trying to make changes. If you think about the one-to-one pilots that many districts have went through, when it was, if you think about Common Core, many of the initiatives that we tried to do, not having that parental support is going to make it far worse. You spend more time trying to explaining your why versus having people on board. And so really leveraging those relationships and encouraging our principals to make sure that our district equity team leaders have the ability to speak about the work, shout it out, right? Have the ability when you have those faculty meetings to give an update, have the ability to have those teachers go to the PTOs to connect with those parents and have those discussions, you know? And meanwhile, offline, strategizing with those PTO folks, and again, those stakeholders in your buildings and parents that are movers and shakers that have the time and also have friends, and starting with coffee talks and just starting to build that capacity, all right, that small coalition of the willing, if you will, that is able to be there. And so then when I do go out and speak, or then when I do have programs that I like to put on, you've got this group of people that are already where this is supporting you. And most importantly, their parents and people in the district, so they can also hold us accountable in different ways if we're not doing the things that we said. So I'm really proud of having those opportunities as we have moved forward. The last one I'll mention, and Valerie, I think you touched on this a little bit, is, you know, it was great to come in and be asked to participate in our new teacher orientations. It was great to come in and be asked to put together professional development for our new staff orientations. Those things are so critical because, again, as you onboard new individuals into your organization, they need to know that you're serious about this work and how this work is going to be part of their everyday experiences and in whatever walk of life that they have in the district. I think that's incredibly critical.
Thank you so much. And yeah, just hearing both of you talk about the importance of really reaching, all those stakeholders, but especially all staff and those frontline staff who may be interfacing, with students, employees in a way that our teachers just, may not be, or making sure that we're really addressing that in a comprehensive way for some of those conversations and communications that are happening that are just as critical. One thing we often do now this time of year is looking and monitoring, what new legislation is coming out the districts need to be mindful of. What are those required and recommended professional development, and trainings that our school code references and requires. So in particularly thinking about those that have an equity focus. Kendra, do you want to briefly touch on any new legislation that we've seen recently passed that does have an equity focus that districts should be mindful of?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are a handful this year. The first one I'll mention is that starting next school year, every public school must include in its curriculum a unit of instruction studying Asian American history and contributions. So districts have the discretion to determine, how much time qualifies as a unit of instruction. But this is really part of a larger effort to broaden the history curriculum, to be more inclusive, and I think, directly targets the increase in bullying and hate speech and crimes that target Asian Americans related to the pandemic. So this is going to be in effect next school year. It has very broad aspirational language at the beginning that studying this material will affirm for students their commitment to the respect and dignity of all races and peoples, and to forever eschew every form of discrimination in their lives and careers. So it is my hope that this instruction will have that impact on our students. I love when the legislature gets, plural with their language. So that's the first one to be aware of. The next one, also related to the pandemic and remote instruction, is a requirement that when you're using third-party online curriculum, that is accessible to students with disabilities, and that it meets specific accessibility standards. And that also goes into effect next school year. So that's something to be aware of. Another one to take note of is that all schools as part of their dress codes, you cannot prohibit hairstyles that are historically associated with race, ethnicity, or texture, including but not limited to hairstyles such as braids, locks, twists. We've seen this in the news. Some schools that have had policies or instituted discipline for students related to hairstyles, and so this is now codified that that is impermissible. Another one is related to training for staff as well as for board members on trauma-informed practices, including the relationship between staff wellness and student learning, the effect of trauma on student behavior and learning, and the effects of implicit bias on recognizing trauma among various student groups. So that does not actually go into effect until the 2023-24 school year, but that's something to be preparing for, is that additional training requirement. The last one I'll mention is that there's a creation of the State Education Equity Committee, which will issue an annual report to the General Assembly and ISB with recommendations for further equity in education for kids from birth through 12th grade. So I think that informs us all that we will be seeing more legislation, more initiatives by ISB that are focused on equity, because we'll have this group that's going to make annual recommendations, and so we'll continue to see more in this area. Amy, do you want to talk more about the professional development training that would be relevant?
So our school code has some particular requirements as well as references to training that schools either have to or may provide. One of those is implicit bias training, which is required for all school personnel. The school code states that each school board must require in-service training for school personnel to include training to develop cultural competency, including understanding and reducing implicit racial bias. This is a required training, but the school code doesn't mention how frequent that training does need to be provided. There's also a reference to anti-bias education training for teachers, which has a focus on intergroup conflict resolution. This isn't a requirement, but the school code specifically provides that this is training that may be provided to teachers, and references that the activities may address intergroup conflict with the objectives of improving intergroup relations on and between the school campus, diffusing intergroup tensions, and promoting peaceful resolution of conflict, and references the fact that the activities must be respectful of individuals and their divergent viewpoints and beliefs. While our focus on equity is on so much more than discrimination and harassment prevention, there are particular training requirements related to discrimination, bullying, and harassment with which schools must comply. So with regard to bullying prevention, they're required for all elementary and secondary school personnel. School districts must train personnel and staff on bullying prevention as a function of implementing our bullying prevention policies. Again, the frequency of that training is not specified in the school code. With regard to training on discrimination issues, that's also required for all school personnel. School districts are required to provide curriculum and staff in-service training to help eliminate unconstitutional and unlawful discrimination in our schools and society. And school districts have to utilize the resources of the community in achieving the stated objective of elimination of discrimination, and to enrich the instructional program, which are some of, again, that language in the school code that we see that needs to be contemplated when providing this training. Again, the frequency of that training is not specified. With regard to sexual harassment and discrimination, we know that under our new federal Title IX regulations, there are requirements for training applicable staff to respond to reports and complaints of sexual harassment, and especially that sexual harassment that meets that definition now under our Title IX regulations. But additionally, all personnel are required to receive sexual harassment prevention training on an annual basis, and the trainings must cover an explanation of sexual harassment consistent with the Illinois Human Rights Act, examples of conduct that constitutes unlawful sexual harassment, including remedies available to victims of harassment, and a summary of responsibilities of employers in prevention, investigation, and corrective measures of sexual harassment. We also recommend that school staff receive training on harassment based on any protected class as well, beyond just sexual harassment. We know we also received a question in advance of today's webinar related to definitions. And, you know, when we provide those trainings specifically on harassment based on a protected class, we always enforce that even if there is conduct that doesn't rise to the level of what may meet that definition of harassment under your school district policies or under the law, that doesn't mean that that conduct that may be reported is conduct that can or should be tolerated. And having systems in place to identify and encourage reporting of any incidents along the lines of the systems that Nate was talking about earlier in terms of having a racial incident form can be really critical to creating an environment that does not tolerate any types of conduct, even that, you know, that may not rise to that level of harassment under your policies. In addition, specific training requirements for school personnel also exist involved in the education of students with limited English proficiency, requirements for training for those providing services to students experiencing homelessness, those working with students who receive special education services, as well as new training requirements exist for school resource officers. And I'll just, you know, close with noting that we still do get some questions regarding ISBE's new culturally responsive teaching and leading standards. And remember, those are requirements that are specific for higher education programs, and there are no current training requirements under those standards for K through 12 districts. But that said, we do know that ISBE has acknowledged that it may offer resources to districts that choose to offer training to its current staff in these areas. So we may see those resources and opportunities arise here soon.
Thanks. And we did have a question about the hairstyle law and whether, you know, that may also apply to things like do-rags. And Nate, I think you wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, I just was going to say, if it's no pun intended, of course, but if it's going to be gender neutral, it will reach its to do-rags, because again, as a hairstyle, that is something that is used on hair. So I would not be surprised if it got there. But again, you know, depending upon where your district is and where your district is in their journey towards inclusivity, I'm sure that that'll be a wonderful topic of debate, as it always is with dress codes.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we close here, I want to give you guys each an opportunity to talk about obstacles you've encountered. Are they the challenges that you expected, or are they something unexpected? And sort of how have you addressed those challenges? Valerie, you want to start?
I think probably for me, the biggest obstacle has just simply been people who don't really understand what equity really means for themselves. And so as a result, they're unwilling to look at themselves to see what it is about me that's causing me to think and respond in this way. So as a result of their lack of understanding, and instead of looking into themselves, or their lack of self-introspection, it leads to unnecessary comments and conversations. So, you know, that's to be expected. It goes with the territory. And I think that kind of like covers everything in terms of difficulties that I've encountered. And then one of the things that, you know, was we talked about just trying to prepare building administrators for having those difficult conversations. So is it everything that I expected in terms of the challenges? Yes, because this is what I signed up for, but this is also what I'm passionate about. So it's important to me to roll up my sleeves and take some of those nicks and bruises and things of that nature, because I recognize and understand that equity work is not easy. It encompasses the difficult conversations and being uncomfortable. While some of these moments can be some of the most difficult and most challenging that you'll have, it's also filled with a lot of very rewarding moments. So I think that answers your question, hopefully.
Thanks. Nate, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, it's equity work is messy. We know that, and you know, just the constant struggle of helping people understand the importance of leaning in and doing their own work. Mm-hmm. Just because I have this title doesn't mean that I can fix people, right? I mean, you have to do and be willing to want to be a willing participant do your own work. You can provide resources to people, but it's really up to them to shift that. And, as I'm sure everyone knows on the call, we've spent so much time in education, trying to fix kids. And just to try to flip that on its ear and have people really start trying to fix themselves and shift our mindsets as adults. I mean, it's the everyday struggle, but as Valerie said so eloquently, this is what I signed up for. This is what I'm passionate about. I'm blessed and thankful to be in a position where I can finally just do this. But at the same time, leading the work and supporting the work are two different things that I want to make sure that my focus is on providing our leaders with their, the will, the skill, and the capacity to have these conversations that are needed at their building level to sustain this work. It's not going to go away. And so just those are the constant grinds and the time, it's, to the time. When do you put the work in? I mean, making sure that, this work is given its it's just the time, the resources, the commitment, from your board of education, from your community all the way down, and being, unabashed about that, being proud about that work and celebrating it versus it being something that's a black box or we talk about it when we're just around like-minded people. I'll know I'm successful when we have more people, providing counter narratives on their own when they start hearing things or challenging people differently, respectfully, but again, providing that counter narrative instead of just being silent.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
I was just going to say, it's funny when Nate, you said about silence. That's one of the things that I always share with all the different teams that I work with, that silence is not an option. We can't grow if we're silent. So it's time to, speak your truth, to use your voice so that we can move forward with our equity journey.
Yeah, absolutely.
So powerful. Thank you, guys. And thank you to everybody for joining us today. We are so grateful to Dr. McCall and Mr. Rouse for sharing your experiences and your insights with us. If people have questions, want to talk more about how to address and tackle this work in your own district, you can reach out directly to Valerie and Nate. They are wonderful resources. If you have questions about legal issues related to this, Amy and I and everybody in our Franczek office is happy to help you as well. We will be sending out additional information on those new laws that I talked about, so look out for those. And we know this is a big process and we want to hear from you guys. Please do, email us if you have questions, topics you want us to talk about, or if your district is doing really good work that you want us to highlight. You can also look for this. It'll be up on the website. It'll be on our podcast, so you can share it with your colleagues. And our next webinar will be on October 14th. So I hope you will join us for that. And thank you for everybody for being part of this effort and the work that you're doing to educate all kids. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.